Hi guys, it's Miss Chang here, and I am here to talk to you guys about designing experiments. So we are continuing on with chapter 4.2, just like you've been working on with Mr. Brody. Before we really get started, I do want to point out that in chapter 4.2, we're focused on designing the actual experiment. In chapter 4.1, we selected the sample. Now, even though we kind of consider everything together, those are two separate things. So we have selected a sample. Let's say our sample might be 100 people or subjects. It might be 50 trees or 75 timers, whatever this experiment that I'm doing, okay? And I selected those 100 subjects or 50 trees or whatever using either a simple random sample, a cluster sample, voluntary response. So one of those sampling methods that we had learned previously in 4.1. Now, completely separately, I'm going to design the experiment, all right? So my three possible designs that we talk about in AP Stat are listed here. Completely randomized design, a randomized block design, or a matched pairs design. Now, you guys have been talking a little bit about the completely randomized design, this first thing right here, all right? But just as a quick refresher, I wanted to run through that with you, okay? A completely randomized design is when you have all of your subjects or experimental units and you randomly allocate them evenly to however many treatment groups you need, okay? So let's say, for example, I have developed a new blood pressure medication and I want to test my new blood pressure medication versus an old medication that's been around for 50 years or whatever versus just a placebo. And let's say I have 90 subjects. What I would do is I would take my 90 subjects and I would randomly allocate my 90 subjects into 3 different groups, right? So this is what my diagram would look like. I would randomly allocate them into group 1, group 2, and group 3, right? 30 subjects each. And then each of these groups would get a treatment. Group 1 would get treatment 1, group 2 would get treatment 2, and group 3 would get treatment 3. So old med, new med, placebo. And then what I would do is I will hope that my new medication is going to improve blood pressure or whatever it might be, right? So ultimately, I'm going to take each of these treatments and compare the blood pressure of the people that were in each of those treatment groups. So that, again, is a completely randomized design. Plain and simple, I take my subjects and I divide them into however many treatment groups I need. One thing I do want to point out, I'm not sure if you guys talked about how we randomly allocate the subjects, but we do that either using a random number generator like on the calculator or a random number table. So if you're asked to describe that, you would say, I give each subject a number from 0, 1 through 90, for example, and use my random number table taking digits 2 at a time until I have 30 unique 2-digit numbers between 0, 1, and 90. Those 30 people would go into group 1. And then I repeat the process, get another 30 subjects, they go into group 2. The remaining subjects go into group 3. So that random allocation is going to be important that you can describe that, all right? Again, that's a completely randomized design. That should be review, all right? Now, that's great, but sometimes I might have a confounding or a lurking variable that I want to kind of make sure I take that into account, all right? So, for example, I know that diet pills and exercise, things like that, tend to have very different effects on men versus women. So let's say I have a new exercise program, okay? And let's say I think that my new exercise program is much more effective than an old one. Let's say like Orange Theory or something like that, okay? But I could do a completely randomized design. Let's say I have 100 subjects. I could have a completely randomized design where I put 50 subjects doing Orange Theory, 50 subjects doing my new workout program, and see which group loses more weight or something like that. But because I know that gender plays a big role on how a workout regimen impacts a person, I might want to block on gender. In other words, I might want to run through my experiment just looking at women and then kind of just looking at men. So gender would be my block, all right? My gender is my similar quality or trait that's going to systematically influence the outcome of the experiment. I think being male is going to affect, or being female is going to affect how my workout program works, all right? So that's the whole idea behind a randomized block design. So you should have a block design worksheet from your sub. We're going to go through a quick example together. And keep in mind your sub also has answer keys to all this stuff, so you can kind of check your answers as you go. But we're going to look at number 3, okay? So the progress of a type of cancer differs in women and men. A clinical experiment to compare 3 therapies for this cancer therefore treats gender as a blocking variable. Keep in mind, I have 500 male and 300 female patients, right? Now, what I'm about to show you, this is not how I selected those 500 males and 300 females. Maybe I used a simple random sample to select those people. Maybe I used a voluntary response. I'm not really sure. This doesn't really tell me, okay? That's completely separate from this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my subjects and I'm going to put them into 2 blocks, okay? So my 2 blocks are the 500 men and the 300 women. Those are my 2 blocks, right? And I'm going to take those 500 men and randomly allocate. RA stands for random allocation. So I'm going to randomly allocate them into group 1, group 2, and group 3. So group 1 has 166 men, 167, 167 men, right? And then I'm going to do the same thing with the women. I'm going to randomly allocate them into 3 different groups. Sometimes we call this like group 4, 5, and 6, okay? Because group 1, 2, and 3 were the men, group 4, 5, and 6 were the women. So I have my men randomly allocated, and now my women were randomly allocated. And then each of these men, group 1 is going to get treatment 1, which we'll call therapy 1. Group 2 is going to get treatment 2, which will be therapy 2. And group 3 will get treatment 3, which is therapy 3. And then what I would want to do is I want to compare the cancer progress just in those men, right? And the reason is because we think that the cancer, or we know, I should say, the cancer differs in women versus men. So then I'm going to kind of repeat this process. I've given the women 3 different therapies, therapy 1, therapy 2, and therapy 3. So I'm going to compare the progress, the cancer progress, just within the women. Then ultimately, I'm going to take a minute and compare the cancer progress in men and women overall. So what this allows me to do, it allows me to look and say, well, this one treatment in particular might work better overall, and it might work better for males, but when I look at females, this other treatment actually works better, or something along those lines, okay? So now that you've seen one example, you can go back and work through the rest of the block design worksheet. Again, check with the sub for answers. Let's take a minute and we'll move on to our 3rd type of experimental design, which is matched pairs. So matched pairs is more like when I only have, first of all, I can only compare 2 treatments, okay? And it's kind of like a specialized block design. So let me give you like a scenario. If I want to do a taste test and I want to say that my homemade chocolate chip cookies are much better than Mr. Birdie's homemade chocolate chip cookies, okay? Would it make sense for me to do a completely randomized design? a completely randomized design in this case would be take my 100 subjects or whatever it might be and divide them into 2 even groups. So maybe I have 50 in one group, 50 people in one group, 50 in the other group. And the 50 people in group 1 are going to eat Miss Chang's cookie only. The 50 people in group 2 are going to eat Mr. Brody's cookie only. And then we're somehow going to decide who makes the best chocolate chip cookie. Well, that's not going to work, right? How do we know which one's better? You guys tested one, you tested the other. So what we're going to do is what's called a matched pairs design. And each person is going to eat both cookies, right? And pick which one's better. So each person is going to eat Miss Chang's cookie and Mr. Brody's cookie and say, here's cookie A, here's cookie B, which one's better? But the problem is there's a lurking variable here. There's a confounding variable. The order in which someone eats a cookie might play a role in which cookie they prefer. Maybe I'm really hungry, and so the first cookie I taste, it's like, that's a great bite of cookie. Or maybe I eat the second cookie, and then after that, that's the one that I remember the most because it's the second one I ate, right? So what I would do is, I'm on like kind of option 2 here. Each subject is going to receive both treatments, in other words, eat both cookies, but in a random order. I would still take my 100 subjects, divide them into 2 groups, so 50 people in each group, and then the 50 people in group 1 would eat Miss Chang's cookie first and then Mr. Brody's cookie, decide which one they like better. The 50 people in group 2 would eat Mr. Brody's cookie first and then Miss Chang's cookie and decide which one they look better. And that kind of takes out that confounding variable about the order of the cookie. Okay? Another option in matched pairs. Sometimes we can't always eat both cookies. So instead, you're going to pair subjects according to similar traits. So I could do this in my like experiment, my exercise experiment, all right? So what I could have done with matched pairs, instead of blocking by gender, I could have matched subjects up similarly, okay? So I could say, well, let me take people who are of the same gender, so let me have like 2 females that are the same exact age with similar genetic backgrounds, similar previous exercise history, similar diets, and I'm going to pair them up, okay? So again, make pairs, males, females that are all similar, and then randomly take one person from each pair, put them into each different group. So basically, I have 2 different groups, but theoretically, my 2 groups should be very similar. They're composed of one person from each pair, right? And then one group would do the Orange Theory workout, one group would do my new workout. So that would be more like the first variation here, okay? So let me take you through 2 different examples. So now I'm on the matched pairs worksheet, okay? So we're going to actually start with number 3. Let's look at number 3. So the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is increasing rapidly due to our use of fossil fuels. Because plants use CO2 to fuel photosynthesis, more CO2 may cause trees and other plants to grow faster. An elaborate apparatus allows researchers to pipe extra CO2 to a 30-meter circle of a forest. We want to compare the growth and base area of trees in treated and untreated areas to see if extra CO2 does in fact increase growth. And we can afford to treat 3 circular areas. Describe the design of a completely randomized design using 6 well-separated 30-meter circular areas in a pine forest. Sketch the circles and carry out the randomization your design calls for, all right? So basically, I would take 6, let me get my 6 circles here, right? Here's my 6 circles, right? I've identified 6 circles. 3 of them are going to get the CO2 treatment, and 3 of them are going to get no treatment. That's going to be like my placebo, okay? So I'm going to randomly allocate I'm going to randomly allocate the 6 circles into group 1 and group 2. Group 1 has 3 areas, group 2 has 3 areas. Group 1 is going to get the CO2 treatment, group 2 is going to get no treatment, and then I'm going to compare the base growth. Make sense? In order to do that random allocation, I'm going to number each area. Now I'm over here. I'm going to number each area, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I'm going to select 3 of these numbers, 1 through 6, randomly to be treated, and the remaining 3 are going to be not treated, okay? Again, that's a completely randomized design. Perfectly fine. Except for, in Part B, areas within the forest may differ in soil fertility. Describe a matched pairs design using 3 pairs of circles that will reduce the extra variation due to different fertility. Sketch the circles and carry out the randomization your design calls for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these 6, I'll do this part in green. I'm going to take these 6 circles, right, these 6 areas, and I'm going to make sure that I have grouped them into 3 pairs of areas with similar fertility. So in other words, let's say that like 1 and 2 are similar, and then 3 and 4 are similar, and then 5 and 6 are similar. So these 2 are similar, these 2 are similar, these 2 are similar. The whole idea is that I want 1 from each pair to be into group 1. And the other from each pair to go into group 2. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to randomly allocate from each pair. So let's say if I'm in this first pair here, I'm going to randomly pick a number, either 1 or 2. Let's say I randomly pick number 1. So number 1 goes in, circle number 1 goes into group 1. Now I'm in here, that means that circle number 2 goes into group 2. Now I'm in here, this similar pair 3 and 4. Let's say I randomly pick a number and I pick number 3. That means number 3 goes here, number 4 goes here. Now I'm in here, 5 and 6. I randomly pick number 6, let's say. So that means circle 6 goes here and circle 5 goes here. Does that make sense? So I have 2 different groups of different circles, but theoretically, these are similar. Groups 1, 3, and 6 are similar to 2, 4, and 5, right? So group 1 is then going to get treatment 1, which will be the CO2. Group 2 will get treatment 2, which will be the no CO2, okay? And then ultimately, I'm going to compare the growth rates between the 2 treatment groups. So again, this is an example of a matched pairs experiment in which we pair subjects according to similar traits. So that's like option number 1 there. We paired the circles according to similar traits. All right, so now let's talk about option 2 here. This is our second variation on matched pairs. This was like that chocolate chip cookie that I kind of talked about. Each subject receives both treatments, but in a random order. So let's look at an example of that. Let's look at number 1 from your matched pairs worksheet, all right? Does talking on a hands-free cell phone distract drivers? Undergraduate students drove in a high-fidelity driving simulator equipped with a hands-free cell phone. The car had brakes. How quickly does the subject respond? 20 students, which would be the control group, simply drove. Another 20, the experimental group, talked on the cell phone while driving. Well, what's that called? That is a completely randomized design. I took my 40 subjects, half of them did one thing, half of them did the other, and then I compared the results, right? Great. But here's the problem. We have a big lurking variable in this situation. The lurking variable, or the confounding variable, is how good of a driver each person is, what their previous driving record might be, or whatever, their driving skills, right? So in part B, how could I use a matched pairs design to eliminate this lurking variable? Well, if the individual driving skills is the lurking variable, each person could be his or her own match. In other words, each person is going to drive with the hands-free cell phone and with nothing. And then we're going to compare the results. But the problem, again, I have a problem. The problem with doing that is that, let's say I put everyone through the simulator using the hands-free cell phone, right? First, measured their response time. And then I put them through the simulator a second time without the phone and measured the response time. The problem is that they're going through the simulator the second time. That's a confounding variable, right? They've kind of seen the simulator before, they know what to expect, they're more familiar with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my 40 subjects and I'm going to randomly allocate them into two groups of 20 students each, right? Group 1 has 20 students, Group 2 has 20 students. And Group 1 is going to get treatment 1, which is just driving without the phone. And then they're going to go through the simulator a second time while being on the phone. Group 2, on the other hand, is going to get treatment 2 first. So they're going to drive on the phone first, and then they're going to get treatment 1 and drive with no phone. Does that make sense? So I have half of the people driving first, and then driving on the phone, and then half of the people driving on the phone first, and then driving without the phone. And then I'm going to compare the differences in reaction times. Now, I want to compare the difference. What reaction time is faster or slower, when you're on the phone or not? So I need to make sure I'm calculating a difference, but I need to be consistent. So I'm going to be very specific and specify that my difference is calculated as driving on the phone minus driving without the phone. All right, so that's my matched pairs, the other scenario in the matched pairs. Now, we've gone through the two types of matched pairs. We've gone through the randomized block design. So we have randomized block design, we have matched pairs. Keep in mind that I only use a randomized block design or a matched pairs to eliminate, or I shouldn't say eliminate, to help reduce the effects of a confounding variable, right? I don't just do it to do it. I do it because it makes my completely randomized design better. All right, that's all with designing experiments. Take the rest of your time to go through those two worksheets that I left for you. And again, you can check answers with your sub. Thanks. See ya.